Hey guys, Jay here, welcome to Eons of Battle, and today I want to take a little trip down Forge World memory lane because I recently took a trip down Forge World memory lane. They have made a lot of really cool kits, and unlike Games Workshop proper, they have discontinued almost all of them, and so they're no longer available. But they're still pretty darn cool. Some of them I could see one day making their way back into Warhammer 40,000 in some capacity, and some of them I do believe are completely gone forever. One of those that I think could come back one day is the Thunderhawk Transporter. First, there was the Thunderhawk and it was made of metal, and then there was the Thunderhawk and it was made of resin, but they released an even bigger Thunderhawk in the Thunderhawk Transporter. It had a cargo capacity of 2 rhinos or 1 land raider, and it actually did fit underneath, and it had claws so you could, in theory, attach these vehicles to the model itself. It didn't really work, and the very few collectors who actually picked up this piece, I think they just glued some vehicles into the actual cargo bay, because it doesn't really look that cool to show it off with no cargo, and it's not that cool to glue in a bunch of very expensive kits to your already humongously expensive model. And the Thunderhawk is unwieldy at the best of times. An even larger Thunderhawk, it's not great for playability, but it was a really cool piece. And it's a really cool peek behind the curtain of like how the Space Marines actually operate, because they have draw pods and they have Thunderhawks to get infantry down to the ground, but how do they get their vehicles down? It's kind of like in Star Wars, how did the AT-ATs get to Hoth? And then in the expanded universe, we find out that there's these giant brick spaceships that come and land, and that's how they transport AT-ATs. And they kind of lift them down like you lift your dog off of the dog grooming table, where you just kind of pick up their barrel chest and lower them down. The Thunderhawk Transporter, I can see why it came and went, because it's too niche. People who want to drop almost $1,000 from Forge World, they want to get something that kind of is really inspiring and awesome and is absolutely going to devastate on the tabletop with tons and tons of weapons. The Thunderhawk Transport didn't really have any. It was just a really cool thing. It's almost like something that would, like the AT-AT dropship, would only really exist in the expanded universe, but somebody out there, some great artist over at Forge World, decided that it needed to become a reality. But I do think the Thunderhawk Transporter has a good chance of coming back to the world of Warhammer 40,000, and that is in the new epic 30k game, Legions Imperialis. I think it could be a really fun unit for that game because it's an actual dropship and you can actually reasonably use it as a dropship. Where dropping a Land Raider into games of Warhammer 40,000, it just doesn't have the same oomph. The tables aren't really big enough. Arguably, they're not big enough for flying units because realistically, flyers in the game of Warhammer 40,000 would just blink over the battlefield in a split second, traveling at like Mach 5. They wouldn't actually be able to do what they do in the actual gameplay, which is sort of fly in these kind of squares around the edges of the board because their movement is so long. But yeah, the Thunderhawk Transporter has a special place in my heart. I just really appreciate that it existed because it's not that cool, but in a way it's really cool. And speaking of things that are super cool, the Chaplain Dreadnought. Chaplain Dreadnought was sold by Forge World back in probably the golden age of Forge World. Forge World right now, it's not that great. It's poorer quality resin miniatures than Games Workshop's perfect plastics, and for like twice the price. It's kind of a bummer, but back in the day, the resin kits used to be really good, much better than the plastics you could get from Games Workshop, and in those days, you could get a lot of Dreadnoughts. If you were a Space Marine player, you could kind of know that if you had some cash burning a hole in your pocket, you could go to Forge World and buy an immaculate, perfect Dreadnought specifically for your specific chapter. When Forge World sold the Chaplain Dreadnought, it was kind of the golden age of Forge World. Right now, Forge World kind of stinks. It's not that good. The resin miniatures are worse quality than the Games Workshop plastics, and they're sold for twice the price. But back in the day, the resin was much better than the Games Workshop plastics, and you could rest assured, if you were a Space Marine player and you had some money burning a hole in your pocket, you knew you could go to Forge World and buy a Dreadnought that was perfect for your chapter, that was perfectly kit bashed and embellished and would look absolutely amazing as a centerpiece for your army. And the Chaplain Dreadnought was right there with them. The Chaplain Dreadnought is an absolutely gorgeous piece of resin. It's the classic box knot with giant angelic wings, and you gotta put the close combat weapons on it. It's depicted with the twin las cannon and the plasma gun. You don't put guns on the Chaplain Dreadnought. You only put close combat weapons because that's what chaplains do. They sing prayers, they write down the legends of the chapter, and they punch stuff. And that is why I love the Chaplain Dreadnought. I desperately need one for my collection because I collect chaplains and I collect dreadnoughts. Why not have those two collections combine into one? But unfortunately, it is no longer sold from Forge World, and I don't really see it returning. It could. There are some vehicle characters like Bjorn from the Space Wolves, and it's kind of fun when it happens. And there's other things that are just like vehicles, like Magnus the Red, that are vehicle-sized and strength entities that are technically just one dude. But I do hope for the Chaplain Dreadnought's return. I'm not holding my breath. I don't really think it's gonna happen, but I might need to make it happen. Because I could just build like a Brutalis Dreadnought as a chaplain and just run it with the Brutalis rules. I might have to do that. But moving from the world of dreadnoughts and back into gigantic flying vehicles, the Tau Orca dropship. Now, the Tau actually have a ton of super big, awesome flying vehicles, but I think the Orca dropship was by far the best one for a bunch of reasons. For the first reason being that it was just a big rectangle, and that might seem like it's kind of lame, like it's not the giant cool stealth bomber flying wings of the other Tau vehicles, but the Tau Orca dropship can actually fit on a gaming table. The form factor is perfect. It's got the big long body that's kind of shaped and colored like a Twinkie, and then it's got the repulsors coming off of the sides. You opened up the lid and it had a full contingent of fire warriors and crisis suits. It was really, really cool. Fully sculpted interior with pilots, gunners, controllers, navigators. It really felt like as awesome as the Tau Manta is, it's completely ridiculous, absurdly priced, and you literally cannot fit it on a gaming table. It's the size of a gaming table. You can fit an Orca dropship, and it's got all of the cool factor that the Manta has, just in a much smaller, more reasonable package. Like, I think those gigantic Titanic units are fun, but they should still be very functional. And I think the Orca is a much more functional model than the Manta. And you still get all the cool factors. You still get the fully crewed interior. You get everything you need in a much smaller, more reasonable package. And I just think it looks better. I think it's a really cool looking ship. It looks like an Orca. I love the Tau stuff is all based on like underwater themes. And it is a big, I guess Beluga would also be a good name for it, but the Orca is probably a cooler name because Belugas aren't scary and Orcas are kind of scary. But speaking of things that are incredibly less intimidating than Orca whales, just something that I really dig that I don't think anybody else really did, and that's why they're no longer sold, but the Imperial Guard Saber weapons platforms. This is something we see over and over and over and over again, just Imperial Guard crewed guns. Like now you got the weapons platform, you've got the weapons batteries, like there's a bunch of different options for taking a larger weapon with some Imperial Guard gunners operating it. But the Saber weapons platform, it's just got that look. To me, it's a very Dawn of War look. It doesn't really look like the Imperial Guard turrets from Dawn of War, but it just feels right. I really like the kind of seesaw, teeter-totter kind of design of the gun. And then you've got that donut-shaped platform that the guy can spin around and fire in all directions. I just really dig it. For me, if I wanted some Imperial Guard heavy weapon teams, I would want the Saber weapons platforms because they just look really good. They don't make as much sense. Like in theory, the heavy weapon team, it's all carried by a couple of guardsmen, and so they can carry it from one place to another, where this platform is massive. But how good would it look on the parapet of some giant castle or defense system with a couple of these things scattered throughout? It would look amazing. Also for me, I think it really harkens back to the Starship Troopers look of Imperial Guard, where everything is this kind of like quickly assembled militaristic hardware that doesn't quite make perfect sense, but also is very utilitarian and functional. I just really like these things, and I think that they look better than anything that Games Workshop has made before or since for the Imperial Guard. Although I do see the pros and cons of the new stuff. And speaking of things that have a lot of pros and a lot of cons, one of the most fun units probably ever made for the game of Warhammer 40,000, a very weird unit, the Orc Lift A Wagon. This is just a regular Orc battle wagon with the ramshackle lift-a-droppa bolted to the back of it. An absolutely amazing vehicle. And I would really like to see it come back for the Orcs, because right now shooting for the Orcs is really bad. There's very few ways to get better than their 5-0 ballistic skill, and a 5-0 ballistic skill kind of means you're just guessing at what's gonna happen. It's less than a 50-50 that your shots are gonna land, but this thing doesn't shoot. It is a giant magnet, or a giant magical space weapon that lifts and drops enemy vehicles. Back in the glory days of 7th edition, when this model was still available, it had some fantastic rules that if this model is mounted on the battle wagon, it gained the ramshackle of rules, and it also had random dice rolls for if the attack worked or not. On a 5 through 6, your attack went through normally, and you would pick an enemy vehicle that had to have a certain number of wounds, and then you would pick it up and drop it. And by way of dropping it, you would roll the scatter die, and if you rolled a 2 through 5, you rolled one die for scatter, and if you got a 6, you would roll 2d6 for scatter. You would move the vehicle in the direction of the scatter arrow, and if it came into contact with anything else, it would immediately get a destroyed result on the vehicle damage table. It was an amazing rule, but if you rolled a 1, all of a sudden you had to do the attack on yourself. And in the absolute worst case scenario, if for the ramshackle roll, if you got a 6, your opponent took over using the Orc Lift A Wagon, and they picked something from your army to lift and drop. Absolutely phenomenal, unbelievably flavorful. And how cool would it be? I could imagine this rule in 10th edition 40K as instead of using a scatter, you get to move their vehicle, and they would also take a boatload of damage in the process. Like, how cool would it be if you just got to take your enemy's vehicle and just move it? Just move it somewhere else. Move it somewhere obnoxious. Like if you have the terrain set up in a certain way, like you've kind of got this close bunker, just put it like on top of the bunker. It would be so much fun and so silly and very flavorful for the Orcs, and give them an opportunity to actually have a pretty banging shooting weapon that's not quite a shooting weapon, so you get past their horrible ballistic skill. Just a really awesome vehicle. I could sort of see this come to the Orcs. The Orcs have gotten a lot of love from Games Workshop over the years, pretty continuously getting new models. I don't think we're gonna see the Orc Lift A Wagon because the Battle Wagon is a very old kit. It's gonna stick around for quite a while longer, but I think if they were to do something with these types of rules, they would make it its own vehicle, its own completely custom vehicle. And typically this weapon is actually an Orc Titan weapon, typically mounted on Stompas or Mega Gargants. That is the level of absurdity of this weapon. Forge World has made a lot of really cool stuff over the years, and it is sad to see them come and go. Games Workshop typically keeps things around for a very long time, and is only now 30 years later starting to retire a few Space Marine kits. But like literally Forge World, 90% of their catalog from the history is gone, and they only have a small fraction of what they used to actually available in store to purchase right now. And it's kind of sad. I wouldn't mind if Forge World disappeared. I think it's time. The models just aren't that good a quality, and I just prefer the Games Workshop plastics. And I prefer the Games Workshop prices, because even though they are obnoxious, Forge World is way worse. I can just imagine all of these really cool Forge World vehicles on my gaming tables, surrounded by some really cool terrain available on our Patreon. Over there, we have a brand new STL terrain set every single month, and this month we have the Gothic Administratum, the ruined bones of a grim dark city. We also make extra episodes of Eons of Battle, and we have it here you can get your name on one of my Black Templar Space Marines, and you can join the crusade. Let me know in the comments below, what are some vehicles and some things from Forge World's history that you miss? What are those models that you missed out on or were never ever going to buy, but were really pretty on the web store? Thanks for watching.